Most people first discover the poetry of Christina Rossetti through her colourful fantasy work, such as Goblin Market, or through her writing for children. So for anyone not familiar with her life, it might come as a surprise that a writer so well known for her fantastical imagery walked a path of incredible religious devotion. In the past 50 or so years, there have been many attempts to variously interpret her writing through the lens of early feminism or as a critique of English society. But today on Out of the Page, I want to talk about the one thread that runs more strongly than any through her writing, and that of course is her unwavering dedication to her religious beliefs. For anyone not familiar, Christina Rossetti was an English poet born in 1830 and closely associated with the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Her brother, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, founded the movement when she was 18, and Christina posed as the model for their first major painting, Girlhood of Mary Virgin. Christina herself was a talented writer from a young age and was nationally published by her late teens. As a young woman, she was predisposed to fits of wild behaviour, but through her increasing involvement with the Church of England, she found an inner calm and sense of purpose. Her first major collection, Goblin Market and Other Poems, was published when she was 31. Rossetti never married and instead spent her life devoted to religious piety and writing. Her later collections were a mixture of children's verse and strictly devotional poems. Rossetti was considered for the position of Poet Laureate to succeed Lord Tennyson, but this wasn't to be, and she died at the age of 64. I first discovered her writing through the inclusion of Goblin Market in a volume of poetry dedicated to fairies and gothic imagery, and I think that's fairly typical of how a lot of readers discover her work these days, similar to how most people find out Coleridge through the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And similarly to Coleridge, most people make an assumption that the rest of her writing is just as macabre. Of course, it isn't, and if anything, Goblin Market is the exception to the rule. Rossetti actually penned a few pieces that were later set to music and have since become standard Christmas carols and may actually already be familiar to people who don't know that she is the writer. Love came down at Christmas. Love all lovely, love divine. Love was born at Christmas. Star and angels gave the sign. She was once engaged and was courted by at least 3 men that we know of throughout her life, all of which she had feelings for and all of which she ultimately turned down. 2 of those men at least she turned down for reasons directly related to her religious beliefs. For Rossetti, her faith and her following of the church was the most important force in her life, alongside, of course, her writing. There are stories of the middle-aged Rossetti picking up pieces of stray paper in the street just in case they had the Lord's name printed on them. And towards the end of her life, her friends stated that she would always sit in the front pew at church and would always stay until the last parishioner had left. For Rossetti, her spirituality was the very core of her being. Although she did write much work that was explicitly Christian, such as the prose collection The Face of the Deep, there are shadows of it in everything she wrote. So let's look at Goblin Market as an example, which is of course her most famous poem. It tells the story of 2 sisters, Laura and Lizzie. Every evening they visit a stream to draw water, and near the stream are goblin merchants who try to entice the sisters to buy their fruits. One night, Laura gives in and gorges on the fruits in a frenzy. Lizzie warns her of another girl who did the same and ultimately died, but Laura ignores it. The next night though, Laura can no longer hear the goblins, and while she pines for their fruits, she begins to wither away over the days and weeks. Lizzie tries to purchase some of the fruits for her sister, but when the goblins realize she won't eat any herself, they try to force feed them to her. She resists and escapes, and when she eventually reaches home, Lizzie is covered in the sap and syrup of the goblin's fruit, which her dying sister then consumes. To her shock, Laura finds the taste repulsive, but regardless, it cures her and restores her to health. Goblin Market is quite clearly a poem that is wide open to interpretation. A lot of scholars have seen in it a statement about repressed sexuality in light of Victorian society. Others see it as a criticism of capitalism, and some have even spoken of it as a parable about drug addiction. But given what we know about Rossetti's unwavering relationship with the church, I tend to prefer the religious interpretation of the poem. See, this sees Laura as a fallen woman given in to temptation and sin. This sin, both spiritually and physically, eats away at her, and she begins to die while she continues to long for it. Her sister Lizzie, though, assumes a figure of sacrifice and redemption. She resists the temptation of the goblins, and when she returns, Laura recognizes this dedication. By consuming the pulp and syrup Lizzie is covered in, Laura accepts that sacrifice into her heart, and in doing so is made pure once more. And if that doesn't sound like a biblical allegory to you, I don't know what would. In the late 20th century and on into the 21st, there has been a pretty large-scale reevaluation of Christina Rossetti's life and writing, mainly with a focus on her work through a feminist lens. This is absolutely valid, and it certainly says a lot about the writer that we can find so many messages laid into her work. But one thing we can never ignore is her incredible devotion to her religious beliefs. I never watch the scattered fire of stars or sun's far trailing train, but all my heart is one desire, and all in vain. For I am bound with fleshy bands. Joy, beauty lie beyond my scope. I strain my heart, I stretch my hands, and catch at hope. Thank you for watching, and I say this every video, if you have not read any of Christina Rossetti's writing, I would highly recommend it. She is a fantastic writer, and her poetry is full of love and beautiful language, and does feel very much ahead of its time in some respects. So please check it out. And let me know what you think. And if you are a fan already, what is your favorite poem? Because a lot of people only know her for Goblin Market, but fans know there's a lot more to it than that. Thank you for watching again. Subscribe to the channel if you like these type of videos. I'll be back soon, so until then, I'll see you later.